All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the PM Saga. So, today I have a dear friend and someone I actually interviewed a few weeks ago on his new book, The Gamification for Product Excellence. So, I would like to welcome Bret Wardle. So, Bret, I'm very happy to have you here, the second person to do the PM Saga. So, we're trying to share inspiring stories for 1,000 product managers, and I'm really happy that you get to become one of the first few people to start this one. So, Brett, the floor is yours. If you can introduce yourself to the audience and give a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. We had a great conversation about the book, and I was happy to come back and share my story, which is pretty crazy that the path that it's kind of taken over the years. But as you said, I'm Bret Wardle. I'm a TEDx speaker. I'm an author. I've been teaching product and game design for. I actually had this conversation with my wife a few days ago, where we started thinking about how long have I been teaching, and I think I've been teaching college since 2008. So
Wow.
however many years that is, but it's approaching 15 years that I've been teaching either game design or film or product management or anything like that, and kind of been all over the place. I was a game designer for nearly a decade, moved into software, kind of bounced from software to games and software to games, and have just kind of slowly found my niche in software design and software product management, with kind of a tendency for using game mechanics within that software design. And that's kind of where I find myself. I'm a lifelong gamer. I'll always be a gamer. I'll always enjoy modding and making games on the side. No matter what I'm doing professionally, I still always take interest in learning a new engine or learning something. So that's kind of my background, and that's kind of what's gotten me to where I am. But it hasn't been without a few jumps and twists and turns. So I'm happy to be here. I love talking with you. I think you're an incredibly talented PM and just full of fun conversation.
Thanks a lot. So, one question I really was interested to know a bit more is that what actually inspired you to become a video game designer?
So, I mean, I played games. I can't remember a time in my life where I wasn't playing games. I think I got my first, I want to say the first system I got was the original NES. That was kind of my zone. I was young enough to have the old Atari 2600, but I didn't have one
Ah,
of those. The first one I remember getting was the Nintendo Entertainment System. And that thing just that was my fun. I would play basketball, we would play baseball, we would go ride bikes and stuff, but I would always come home and play Nintendo. That's what I loved. And I loved Mario, I loved Zelda, I loved Metroid, all of the classic Nintendo titles. Just for years and years, I was into those. And then as I got older, PCs came along, and I kind of became a PC gamer for a few years there. The classic, the Baldur's Gate series I loved. Diablo, Diablo 1 and 2 took tons of time, and I just found myself entrenched in these worlds. I loved it. I loved it the same way that some of my friends loved reading books or people loved watching TV or movies. I loved video games, and that's really where it came from. And as I got older, I started to play with it more. I started to mod. I started to kind of find online, the birth of the internet was right as I was kind of coming of age. I mean, I was turning 16 to 18 when the internet was blowing up and everyone was using AOL and that kind of stuff. And so I started getting in chat rooms, getting in forums, talking to people about how you mod these video games, and started making items for things like Baldur's Gate and Diablo, and scripting levels. I remember Duke Nukem 3D had a level editor, and I spent hours on that thing, just making levels and then sending them to people in chat rooms and being like, "Hey, will you play my level? I'll play your level if you play my level." And
wow.
just as I got older, I kind of graduated high school, and I graduated high school as in Salt Lake City, in Utah specifically. I don't know if they have this across the United States or if they have a similar thing worldwide, but we have what we call the Sterling Scholar Program, where every school chooses their best student in a few different categories. It's there's a Sterling Scholar for foreign language and for math and for English. And I was that for technology in my school. Like I was the Sterling
That's
Scholar
very
for
nice.
technology. And that's what I did. Like I loved it. Like I was just like the computer kid. Like there wasn't a lot of us. Like there weren't very many people back then that had computers and used them and knew how to use them. And that kind of just propelled me to where I was, where I am today. Like I jumped into technology and games specifically. Like I've just loved. Like I literally could sit and talk about video games for the whole time that we're here if we wanted to.
That's quite good. So, if we're now looking at how did you actually transition from gaming industry into becoming a product manager?
Yeah, so fortunately and unfortunately, I went through a number of studio closures. Like I went through a couple of good um, video game studio closures, which is not unheard of. I mean, we still have that problem in the game industry today. Studios are shutting their doors all the time. 2023 in particular has been an incredibly rough year for the gaming industry. Like a ton of my friends, a ton of my colleagues that I've worked with in games are themselves out of jobs because of the studio closures that are going on. So that was a big part of it. Like a big part of it was I went through a couple studio closures and kind of just said like, I can't have this volatility. When I was a young bachelor, like, okay, whatever, like I'll find somewhere else to land. There's a couple other studios here in Salt Lake that I can go to. But as I got older, as I got married, as I had kids, I couldn't have this volatility. Like it was too many ups and downs. And a couple of the engineers that I worked with in games, some good friends of mine still to this day, reached out to me and they're like, hey, as engineers, like they have a lot more leeway. Like engineers, if you know a coding language, you can jump from games to software easy. The code doesn't change. Like if you know C sharp or C++ or whatever the language is, it's the same C++ in the game engine as it is for a website or whatever they're programming. So it's easy for them. And I knew them well enough that they kind of said, hey, we've jumped over to these companies. We've doubled our salary and gotten rid of our crunch time. Because that was the other thing in games, especially back there in the early 2000s, the crunch time was atrocious. Like I jokingly, but not very jokingly say like there were times where we would wake up at 6 a.m., like start working, like designing levels, testing stuff, tweaking stuff. We'd have a dinner brought in. You'd have your meals brought in because they didn't want you to leave the studio. So you'd eat, you'd do everything there. You'd do that until about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And then sometimes you would literally sleep under your desk, wake up at 6 and do it again. So
Talk
we were
about
working like,
dedication, right?
in some cases, 20-hour days for 6 and 7 days a week. Like there were times where I probably had like less than 20 to 30 hours not working in any given week as we were trying to like get these games out
Yeah.
the door. And I mean, you're a salaried employee, you don't get overtime, like you're not getting any extra money from that, you're just getting burnt out. And so when I talked to these friends that had moved to software and they were like, hey, we work 40 hours a week and guess what, we go home and we see our friends and family. And it was like, oh, that sounds fantastic. I haven't had friends for years. So like, that's really what started is they said, hey, come over here. Initially, my first role moving to software was in QA. Like I went as a lead designer in games to QA in software. And even with that, like, I hate to call it like a demotion in a sense, because obviously like QA is a huge part of software engineering. But even with that, even from moving from like a lead designer to QA, I still doubled my salary. So that kind of tells you like where the pay scale was in games. And I did that, like I did QA, and I love it. Like to me, QA is a great leap forward for anything in software development. Because in QA, you need to understand a little bit of the code. You need to be able to dive in and go, hey, what might be causing this? In QA, you need to understand design. So not only can you say, hey, this doesn't look right, but this is how I think we could fix it. And you touch all these different pieces. And QA is kind of the like it's sort of the jack of all trades, master of none. Like they need to know a little bit of everything, but they don't generally know enough to like go and get an engineering job. So it's a great starter position. A lot of my students, I'll actually suggest for QA jobs and say, hey, if you don't know what you want to do, if you don't know if you want to go into product, if you want to go into design, you want to go into engineering, QA is a great place to start because it's a little easier to get hired there, and you can kind of guide your path. You can say like, hey, I want to learn a little more about engineering, or I want to learn a little more about design, and you're able to do that. And so that was perfect for me because that's exactly what I did. Is I got into QA, and as a game designer, you have to do all that. Like that's the one difference that I'll say between a game designer and a product manager is game designers know significantly more code. Like game designers generally are the people scripting. Like they're not writing the code, but they're given the tools to make those tweaks and adjustments. And so you have to know a little bit of scripting language to do that. If you're a level designer, you have to set up triggers and say, hey, when this door opens, this has to happen. When I talk to this NPC, this has to happen. And as a product manager, I don't get a lot of that. And sometimes I miss it. Like a lot of times, like if I'm given a role in product where they're like, oh, do you want to hop in and maybe like do some of this? Like, I'm like, yeah, like I'd love to. Or at Overstock, like Overstock is a great example. I was a PM there for a while, and I would have my engineers check me because I don't have access to the repo. So I would have them check me out files that are like low code files. I would do the coding, and then I'd like email them back the file and be like, check this in for me. I promise is not like, you're not uploading a virus on my behalf or anything like that. Like I just tweaked some stuff that I knew how to tweak, and it was great for me. And that QA led to business analyst roles, led to product roles, and I kind of just slowly expanded on those product roles.
That's actually very inspiring. So I didn't know actually about this move of QA that it can give you all this kind of insight. That's quite interesting. So if you're looking more at specifically game design, so from your point of view, the key skills that you found from game design most applicable to transition to product management?
For me, it's user research, and like it's like it's psychology, right? It's understanding why people do the things that they do. Like those are two skills that are imperative to a game designer. Like games, if games don't play test, if they don't go through alpha, beta, all of that, your game goes to the market and doesn't succeed because everyone goes like, oh, this isn't fun. I don't enjoy this. You have to play test. You play test early, you play test often, you take that feedback, you iterate on it. Like I can't count how many times working on games we would have to bring in these other, I never had the privilege of like working on like what would be considered like an adult game per se, like a Call of Duty or something. I worked on like Tale of Despero and like My Little Pony games and like all of this where like I wasn't the demographic, like I wasn't the person playing it. And so as a designer, I can't design that game for me. Like I can't ramp it and scale it for me. I'm like someone who plays a lot of video games. The people playing our games are like 5 to 8 year olds that this could be their very first video game for all we know. And so it was imperative that we bring people in and have these kids play the game and get their feedback and hear them laugh about certain parts and see them get frustrated about certain parts. And that applies directly to product. Like as a product manager, you have to get stuff in front of your users. You have to see how your users are using the product, see their pain points, talk to them about what they enjoy, talk to them about what they don't enjoy, and go in and fix those things. And that's huge. Like that was one of the biggest things. That was the one thing I would say that was my cue to say when I moved to QA. I was like, hey, this is great. Like I'm getting paid more. I'm making software. It's not games, but I still enjoy it. And then I started to see more and more like, oh, these people who are working in product, they're doing what game designers do. Like this is what game design has been doing for years. And the UX industry, like UX industry and product industry itself was even pretty new. I mean, we're talking like this was like, yeah, I don't know, like 2008 probably. And so product and UI UX was just kind of getting off the ground. And I was like, hey, these UX designers are just game designers for software. Like they're just doing what game designers did, except they don't have to code. And so that's what kind of led me there. And then it's just the psychology. Like that's the other thing. It's just the understanding like how humans interpret information, how we understand colors, like the Gestalt theory type stuff and what UX is now. Like that's the other big thing is just understanding how users learn, read, and retain information. Like what makes us happy, what makes us frustrated, how we voice those emotions, like without saying I'm frustrated, like being able to watch a user test and go, they are obviously frustrated. Like I can read their facial cues and all of that stuff. And that's really what the biggest jump was for me. Game mechanics were secondary to a certain extent. Like I didn't really think of like, oh, well, how can I turn this e-commerce site into Super Mario? Like that's not really what I was thinking, but I really thought that like, hey, understanding your user and adapting to them and understanding humans in general and how we perceive information, those are direct correlations between game design and product design.
That's quite interesting. So when we move to product management, right, we all face challenges, right? And I think for every product manager, there is this 1, 2 challenges that really changed his career and shaped how he thinks and how he approach even problems. So from your perspective and during your journey, what would you say was the challenges and how did you actually overcome them?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest challenge is the one difference between game design and product design. And that is what I refer to as the project management side of things. Like as a game designer, you don't really deal with that project management. You have a producer or an associate producer or someone, and they're the schedule keeper. Like they're the ones that are like checking the boxes, making sure things are getting done, making sure the timeline is going. As a designer, your job is just to design the game and make the game fun. And so when I moved to product, a lot of product management gets that project manager sort of role, which is not my strong suit. Like I have never been, like at heart, I'm a creative. Like I'm a product designer less than the product manager, in my opinion. I'm kind of the, like when you look at the like, well, are you a manager or are you a sole contributor? Like I am in that sole contributor camp. Like managing people is not like my strong suit. I've done it obviously for a lot of years and I've grown to be like a decent scrum master, but that is not what I knew before. And so I had to come in and learn these sort of tasks and that kind of stuff that were new to me. Like I had obviously been on the other side of it. Like I'd had a producer that was like, oh, can you get the like combat system checked in by Friday? Can you do this? Like I had someone like helping me get on track with that, but I had never been that person. And so as product, that was the biggest challenge for me is trying to learn that and try to get on the other side of that and say, okay, there's a lot more management here than I thought there would be. Like when I thought product manager, I mean, obviously it's in the title, but I didn't think about the management aspect of it as much. Like I had always been more of a sole contributor. And so that was a bit of a challenge for me, learning how to manage people, learning how to manage cross-functionally, especially. Like a lot of times product, especially now, is starting to become the sort of glue of that cross-functional team. Like all the teams that I've worked in the last, I don't know, 10 years, like I have engineers reporting to me. I have QA reporting to me. I've had customer success, like the entire customer success department has reported up to product in companies that I've been with. And so I really have to start managing my time and going, okay, well, it's less of a design job now and more of a manager job. Like I've got to manage people as much as I have to manage my product. And that was a bit of a challenge for me at first is trying to get used to that.
Yeah, I think this is something that every product manager can actually reflect to because at the end of the day, you don't study to become a product manager. And this is one of the things that I've found that across different industries, you transition from something, a different function, to become a product manager. Sometimes this becomes the big challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I've like, just like you said, like I've seen product managers come from engineering, come up from QA. I've worked with product managers that came from like sales. They were like sales reps. And that's a great path too. Like anything, like the thing that people sometimes forget is like sales is talking to the customer every day. And so there's a lot of times they think like, oh, well, sales can't do product management. Well, why not? Like they probably have more face time with the customer than anyone else in the company. And if they do that right, like if they listen to the customer and they're empathetic as they're having those conversations, sales can make great product managers. And I think you're exactly right. Like product can come from anywhere. Like product is the one role that like really you can like, if you enjoy what you're doing, you can kind of move into it from any other cross-functional team.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, one of the things I was, how to say, surprised to see that you worked on the Sims 3 game, right? So
Correct.
that's actually quite interesting. And I just want to get more understanding. So when you worked on that kind of product, can you give a little bit of elaboration? Okay, how did that impact you? And when, from your point of view, you were dealing more on designing part, right? So how did working on such games, specifically games actually that we see now more going into something like the virtual world, meta, all these kind of things, shaped your experience?
Yeah, so the Sims was a crazy experience to begin with. It's a huge team. Like, and I was just part of the EA Salt Lake studios. I mean, EA has studios all over the world. I mean, they have teams in Europe and Australia, like they have teams all over the place. And so we were a relatively like, I mean, speaking on the EA scale of things, we were a relatively small EA team based out of Salt Lake. And we were responsible specifically for the Sims franchise for the expansion packs. So there's a studio in California that was like the main Sims franchise, and they built what's referred to as base game, which is like just the Sims 3, and then Salt Lake built the expansion packs. So that's kind of what we did. My role there was actually as the QA manager for all of the Sims franchise, and so I was managing the team in Salt Lake. We had external testers in that Redwood Shores studio in California, and then we had at times, I want to say like upwards of 300 testers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So we had like a whole testing team on the LSU campus there in Louisiana. And I went down a couple of times and visited with that. And that was just an absolute riot because they basically have this warehouse that's on the Louisiana State University campus that is just college students testing EA video games. And it's for the entire company too. So like there's this like giant room that's dedicated just to like the latest Battlefield game. And then there's our Sims team, and there's a Madden team and a FIFA team. And there's like 1,000 college students that are just getting paid to test video games, which is like the coolest gig in the world if you're in college. But it's crazy. Like there's a lot of people doing that. And though that entire Sims team, like all those hundreds of people fell under me. Like that's as the Sims franchise QA manager, like I did that. The other thing that was fantastic about The Sims is it thrives on listening to the community. Unlike some other games that kind of just build what they want and move out, The Sims was dedicated to their community. So as a QA team, that was another part of our role is as quality assurance, we're monitoring the forums. We're listening to what people are saying and saying, hey, there's people that have found a pretty bad bug. Like we need to go in and fix it. Or, hey, we have someone talking about building a better barbecue in the game, and it's created a 5,000 post thread on the forum. So like, we probably should add a new barbecue to the game because it would like make the fans absolutely crazy and they'd love it. And that was part of our job too, is trying to like filter out all of that stuff and gather like, hey, what's the community saying? Like, what's our community saying? Get that to designers, get that to producers, start working it into games. And it was a crazy process. I mean, those games are huge. They're enjoyed by millions of people. And so it's always fun to talk about working on that. One of my favorite stories is the first expansion pack I did was Showtime. It was Sims 3 Showtime. We worked with Katy Perry. Like Katy Perry did like songs for the game. She had like a character in game. She did our commercials. So like that was a crazy experience to begin with, is just having like Katy Perry in and working on this title. But then every game you do, you create a new town. Every expansion pack has a new town. And so we created this town. I forgot what it's called, but you get to like design the families because The Sims has families that already live in these towns. And so I designed one of these families. I had just started dating my wife, and my wife had 2 kids before we got married. And so I designed a family that lives in this town that is my wife and her 2 kids. And to this day, like they still go in and play the game and see their family, and it's them. Like, I modeled the characters after them. We had to obviously change names for like legality reasons, but like it carries their name. It, like, I made it look like them. The traits, like in the Sims, like every sim has like traits and personality characteristics. I kind of made those match as well. And it was fun. Like, it's a fun experience. And now to this day, like, I'll always have that family in the Sims that is my family. And I mean, me and my wife are obviously still married, and our kids can still talk about this for the rest of
Yeah,
their
that's
lives.
that's quite amazing. That's really amazing. So if we move from here, right, and I saw the TEDx talk that you gave, and I think the 5 things that you mentioned, like clues,
Mhm.
layering, experimentation, ambience, and repetition, and the titles for everyone listening. So it's can 90 seconds video game be a standard for experience design? So you mentioned in the talk that you believe that these 5 design principles can actually be used to create an engaging experience in any field, not just video games. And
Yep.
you also said that you want to encourage designers and anyone interested in psychology to play more games and pay attention to how they use these principles, right? So using this and how by doing so actually we can learn how to create experiences that people love and remember for years to come. Because at the end of the day, when I look at product management and I keep hearing this hype that it's not anymore a product, it's the experience, right?
Mhm.
Because if you're looking just for a simple product, there's lots out there, but what actually makes that difference, that uh, tipping point, right, between the brands is the experience that each brands provide. So how would you link that and all these 5 steps from clues until repetition to product management?
Yeah. So that the play more games has kind of become my mantra. Like, that's like almost every interview I give, like, this comes up, and I really do wholeheartedly believe in it. Like, I think um, if you want to understand why games compel people, you have to go and experience. It's no different than any other experience. If you go, why do so many people love, like, going and visiting whatever, like Washington D.C., or why do people go and visit the Eiffel Tower in France? You can't just like read about it, or you can't like take a class about why people enjoy the Eiffel Tower. You've just got to go see the Eiffel Tower. And then when you get there and you look at it and you're like, holy cow, like, that's beautiful, that's amazing. Like, I couldn't put this to words until I'm here. Games are no different. Like, it's impossible to talk about and teach about like why people enjoy playing games if you're not willing to go play games. Like, you've got to go and play games. And I promise, if you can find the right ones, like, that's the thing, is a lot of times people think, oh, video games are a waste, I'm not going to play the new Call of Duty or Fortnite. There's thousands of games. Like, I haven't played Call of Duty since, I think, the original Call of Duty. That's just not my style of game. And that's what you have to find, is you have to find your style of game. Like, find what you enjoy. And as far as the clear example, the clear mnemonic specifically, so that idea was honestly born out of like onboarding is where it started. Like, the idea that clues, layering, experimentation, ambiance, and repetition, those are the 5. Like, that's the key to an amazing onboarding experience. And that's one of the things that games, I think, have always done really, really well, is onboarded their users. And software has struggled. Like, software, the tutorials are usually dry, and there's pop-ups, and like people are usually like, nah, just like leave me alone, I can figure this out. And people don't enjoy it in the same way that we enjoy game onboarding. Like, games work your onboarding into play. Like, you don't have, like, most games don't have a very explicit, like, stop here and do this. Okay, now stop here and do this. Some of them do, and those are the ones that people usually complain about. But some of them, and this is why I use Super Metroid has nothing. They have no tutorial. They have no, like, they have gatekeeping, obviously, where you can't go to certain areas, but it feels 100% natural. You just kind of come across these things where you're like, well, I can't get through there. I don't know. It looks different. Like, I know I can get through there. I just can't get through there yet. And then you start to play the game, and then you get some power up. You get missiles, and you're like, oh, these missiles open those different doors. I remember all those different doors that I said I couldn't get through there yet. and now I can go back and get through them. And those are the kinds of things that I think as you do it naturally, it's fun. Like it's fun, it's enjoyable, it feels rewarding to you as a player and a user to do those kinds of things, as opposed to being told, oh, now you've got to go right click on this if you want to do this, and that's how you do it. Being told what to do feels like you're being micromanaged, right? Nobody likes being micromanaged. And so using things like clues, layering, experimentation, ambiance, and repetition help alleviate that. Like it helps things feel more natural. And honestly, like that's how software should feel. Like software should feel like that. It should feel like, hey, we're like, I'm learning stuff that's new and enjoyable, but I'm not being force fed it. Like I'm not being forced how to do this. And it feels like a fun and unique experience. And there's a reason why we still talk about that kind of stuff. We still talk about games. And that was kind of the point of using Super Metroid for that. Is Super Metroid is approaching 30 years old. Yet it's still discussed and still looked at as one of the greatest video game experiences of all time. Like 30 years old. I can't think of a software I used 30 years ago that I'm still talking about today. I mean, like Microsoft Word was probably around, but nobody likes it. Like nobody enjoys using it. It's just there and we're forced to use it. But even then, back then, like 30 years ago, it was like Word perfect. And now it's like even Microsoft Word is being phased out for Google Docs and all these other softwares. And to create something that has the staying power like games do, we need to use that kind of stuff. It's just like you said, it's the experience. It's less of a, like, I can find anything to accomplish my tasks. There's 100 apps out there for solving whatever problem I have. But what's the experience like? And one example I always love to use is, there's two. Like Waze is the first one, where there's Google Maps, there's Apple Maps, there's a tons of ways to get directions to where I want to go. But Waze is an experience. I see the other Waze users on my map and I can honk at them. I can wave to them. I can go in and change the maps. I can say, hey, avoid this. If I see some construction, I can say, hey, avoid this construction. If there's a mattress or something in the middle of the road, I can say, hey, everyone, watch out. There's debris here in the road. Like, we need to be careful. If there's a police officer hidden behind a tree watching for speeders, I can go, hey, like, you guys, there's a cop up here. Don't, like, slow down, everyone. Like, it becomes a community event and it's an experience. Like, driving from point A to point B is something we do all the time. Like, we take it for granted and do it all the time and don't think about it and use the maps. But Waze has turned that into an experience. It's turned that into a social activity. It's turned that into something that I have the power to control. Duolingo is the other example I love using. It's like you can go and learn a language. There's countless apps to do that. You can use Rosetta Stone, you can use Khan Academy, like tons of different places do this, but Duolingo has turned it into an experience. It's something that you log in, you keep your streak alive, you're given rewards, you feel like you're progressing. It's not like a textbook where it's like, okay, well, today I'm going to do chapter 7. And I guess tomorrow I'll try to do chapter 8. And no, Duolingo like keeps you involved. It keeps you excited. It keeps you guessing at what comes next. It gives you those same things. Like it's giving you clues as to what's coming next. It's layering features like, okay, we're going to start with some basic words, and then we're going to layer on sentences, and then we're going to layer on verb conjugation, and then we're going to do all that. And it gives you that sense of you can experiment. Like, hey, I don't know what the answer to this is, so I'm just going to guess and experiment. And if I'm wrong, like, yeah, so be it. Like I take a step back, but I can easily earn that back. And just the overall ambiance too is classic for Duolingo. It just feels fun. It looks fun. It's enjoyable. It's not a mundane, we're going to sit down and learn a language. And they just do that really, really well. And obviously for a language learning, something like repetition is baked into it. Like you're going to repeat those same words over and over. You have to learn. Like you have to perform these activities over and over and over. And they use those 5 skills really, really well. And it creates a fun and engaging experience that feels a lot less like someone sitting down and saying like, do this, do this, do this. It feels like something that you guide, you control, you're discovering these different pathways, you're discovering this information, and just creates a sense of fun.
Yeah, no, this is really inspiring. Actually, I want, because I work in the home appliance industry, so one of the things
Mhm.
I'm really now very interested to see, how can I use this to try and shape the experience a bit differently. But I think this is a very nice way of putting it, actually.
Yeah, I think the great thing for hard goods, like for that kind of stuff, is you really do get an experience. Like that's one
Yes.
thing that I think Apple has always done well is they know that it's not just like, oh, I'm as I'm using the iPhone, I'm enjoying it. No, they start with the Apple Store. Like as you walk into the Apple Store, you've begun the experience. Like that store is an experience. You're finding your Apple guide, you're finding the product you want, you're unboxing it, and the unboxing is beautiful and elegant and makes you feel elite. And like Apple does this experience thing like pretty flawlessly for their types of users. And that's great for like for you in the hardware industry. Like you get to control some of that. Like you get to control those unboxing. Like in software, the closest we usually have to that is like the sales website. And it's like, okay, well, the sales website can kind of start to lay this groundwork. How we price it is part of that. But we don't get that true, like everything's digital now in technology. So we don't get that same sense of like, but what does the packaging look like? What is like when I unbox it, do I feel like I've reached elite status? And so it can be really fun. I mean, it's obviously a challenge, as you know, but it's fun because you do truly get that end to end sort of experience.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. So you mentioned that you have a US patent actually pending at this point. So I just wanted to know more for you about, so what's the scope and what's going to happen.
Yeah, so honestly, I don't know what's going to happen. The U.S. Patent Office is crazy, and like I I love it and hate it. Like I love and hate the U.S. patent process because it's great because if you genuinely like design and create this idea, you do have a way to protect it. So you can protect your intellectual property, but like the way that it works is like there's just so many loopholes and the way you word things can be like such a touchy subject that it's kind of just lost its value. Like anyone can find a way around almost any patent. So to be honest with you, I don't know where the one I stood stands, but basically what we had built was at Ident Solutions, which is a startup that I was a co-founder with and a founding member. We built an algorithm that can take, it was taking data from 2,500 databases, criminal records, incarceration records, like all sorts of stuff, and pulling it in. And that data is not standardized. It is a lot of times written by hand and then coded into a computer. And in some cases, it's 20, 30 years old. So it's being transposed. And it, to be quite honest with you, it's garbage data. Like it's a ton of just data that's impossible to figure out. And what we kind of did was we built an algorithm that uses regular expressions and machine learning to kind of go in and say, hey, based on the letters that are in here, based on the phonemes that I have, this is probably this type of offense. And excuse me, we can go and start to piece this together. So if someone has these different offenses and it's like, okay, well, I have a theft charge here and a burglary charge there, and these are in multiple cities or these are in the same city, we can start to piece all of these together and paint a picture of this person and say, hey, if this person you know nothing about them, based on this data that we found in all these public databases, here's a picture that you can start to paint. And what we used that for was securing critical infrastructures. So if a visitor that walked in off the street, went to like a power plant, a stadium, a water treatment facility, an airport, anything like that, and was trying to gain access to privileged stuff. Like let's say they showed up as a construction worker and were like, yeah, I need to get into the middle of this dam, and you just got to leave me there for a little bit. Well, the security guard doesn't know anything about this person. Like they don't know if they're a good or a bad actor, if they have like terrorism ties or they're just a construction worker. And so we would do that instantaneously. We would take their ID, scan it, take the name, date of birth, go and search these databases, and within 10 seconds give you back a red or green that kind of says like, hey, there's nothing So there's nothing about this person that would pose a threat to your facility. And facilities could choose. Like if they were a like electrical facility, maybe they don't care about sex offenders. But if they're a school, they probably do care about sex offenders. And so we allowed them to basically choose what we called intent flags, where they could say, hey, we care about violent crimes, we care about drugs, we care about theft, we care about mischief, we don't care about traffic offenses. They could turn all of those on or off. So if it's like, hey, all we care about is if someone is violent and has a history of theft. Or maybe it's a school and they're like, hey, we care about violence and sex offense. And they could customize that. And we would take all the data from all those databases, distill it down and say red or green. Like you need to care about this person or you don't. Like he has something you should be aware of. And then if it was red, in the back of house, like not at the front desk, someone in the back of house could usually review it and go, okay, like I'm looking at the data here. This looks like it's probably okay. And we would highlight like, hey, this looks like it might be this person, but the name is spelled a little bit differently. So like you can kind of make a judgment call, but we would just sort of make them aware of what was going on. And patenting that process and the communication between those databases is what that US patent was. And as far as I'm aware, it's still pending. I've heard that that process can take up to like 10 years. So I don't know. I'm not keeping it on my watch really anytime soon, but it was interesting regardless. At the time, we felt it was worth applying for that patent because it was technology that we thought was unique. But that's actually part of ident Solutions, which that startup has now gone under as of May. So I don't even know like where that patent would go. I mean, my name's on it, but I don't know who they would even reach out to.
Yeah, yeah, no, but this is actually quite interesting. Wow, I think it's actually quite interesting point because at the end of the day, doing that kind of tech, right, and doing that in, as you mentioned, a few seconds, giving that kind of recommendation, I think this is something that's quite interesting. So when you're looking now back at the career, right, you mentioned a few times that game designers, right, had to be the jack of all trades because you have to do some coding, you designing, all these things. But would you agree or disagree more that product managers across different industries, of course, actually need to be a jack of all trades?
No, I think so. I think that's why I like product management coming from a game design background is you have to be a little bit people manager. You you're usually the cross-functional glue in a sense. Like from my experience at least, the product team is really the person that is the cross-functional leader. Like engineers don't go directly to sales. Sales doesn't go directly to customer success. Everything kind of comes through product. Like if sales, marketing, and engineering want to get together, product is usually the spearhead for that. Where product will say, hey, I want to pull everyone in and let's talk about this. Like, let's talk about sales. You want a new feature on the front page of our website. Let's get engineering in here to talk about it and let's discuss what your needs are, what engineering can do. And I think you're exactly right. Like product is really a jack of all trades where we do need to have a little bit of that. We need to have a little bit of sales in us. We need to have a lot of marketing in us. We need to have a ton of customer success and customer research in us. And a little bit of engineering always helps. Like that's what I've kind of found is one of the ways that I've like kind of established myself in product is being able to have those conversations with engineers. Like a lot of other product leaders sometimes maybe can't look at their code and go, oh, I think I know what might be going on here. And part of that's my QA background because I can like poke at it and try a few scenarios and usually reverse engineer like, okay, I think I found what's going on. And the engineers are usually surprised and a little bit caught off guard with like, well, what do you know about code? And it's like, well, I don't know a lot. I'm obviously not an engineer, but like I can look at the source code of something and probably tell you what might be going on, or at the very least, as someone who's QA minded, I can usually try to poke at it enough to tell you it works fine on Chrome, doesn't work on Internet Explorer, so that's probably your problem is that it's an Internet Explorer bug. And It is like, I think you're exactly right. Like, I think product is a great sort of glue to keep all of those cross-functional teams together. So having knowledge in any of those areas is valuable in product. I kind of tell people, like, don't shy away from any of these other areas. If you want to learn a little code, great. If you want to learn UI UX design, awesome. Like, if you're coming from sales, great. Like, these are the things you need to pay attention to make it work for product, because there's things you'll learn in all those areas that may not apply to product, but there's definitely things within them that directly apply to product.
That's quite very good analogy. So you've talked a lot about becoming a people, so looking at or discussing with the customers and talking to people more. So if we're asking the question that I think everyone wants to have an answer for, how do you actually build products around people?
Yeah, for me, it's just talking to people. Like, it's empathy. There's two things that I always promote in product managers. When I'm hiring for product, there's two things that I look for, honestly, more than anything. Like, more than where they came from, more than like what roles they've had previously. Are they empathetic? Like, can they put themselves into people's shoes? And are they curious? Like, are they someone that has genuine curiosity, where they say, I want to understand how this works? If you are a curious empath, you will make a great product manager. Like, I don't care what industry it's in. Like, I've very rarely gotten to work in industries where I am the end user. I mean, I built software for law enforcement officers. I built software for security guards at critical infrastructures. I made video games for children. I worked on the front page of Overstock, which is for home furnishings, which, like, I don't really care about. Like, that's not my cup of tea. So everywhere I've been, I have to be an empath. I have to be able to put myself into those shoes and go, I am not a law enforcement officer, but today I'm going to be one. And that includes, like, getting in, like, I've done countless. When I was at Spillman, which is now Motorola, when I was there, I went for ride-alongs with cops all the time. Like, anytime the police force would take me, I was like, let me go. Like, let me ride with you. Like, I want to be in the back seat. I'll be in the front seat. Like, I don't care what we do. And like that, there were some crazy situations that I got put in by doing that. And it's fun to me. Like, I enjoy doing that. And I'm curious. Like, I was genuinely curious. Like, what does your day-to-day look like? And some of the things you get back, you would never hear this if you weren't in that car with them. Like, so many times they were just like tugging on their like bulletproof vests. And it was like, what's your like biggest, like, that's the one thing that I always got from cops. And when I asked them, like, what's your like biggest frustrations? And I would be expecting them to be like, oh, well, the software doesn't save my work properly. And the software, they don't care about the software. Like, their cares were that the bulletproof vest is like 110 degrees in the summer and it's uncomfortable. And when they're sitting in the car, there's no way to adjust. Like, that bulletproof vest is their number one concern with a bullet. Like, no pun intended. Like, they don't care about the software. They don't care about the car. That's their frustration. And so I would take that kind of stuff and like try to work. Like, one of the things that I did at Spillman was I started to design a voice only mobile companion, so that they could do everything they needed with voice, because that was one of their concerns, is like, it's so hard to like turn to my computer over here and I have this giant vest on and it's hot. And so I started designing these voice commands where they could just run everything they needed without having to turn to a computer. They had a microphone mounted on their thing. And as cops used it, they were just like, this is amazing. Like, how come no one thought of this before? And it's like, because the other people weren't sitting in a car with you and seeing your frustrations. And that's kind of what I found, is those two things. If you are a curious empath, you can design products for anyone, because if you're curious, you will dive into it head first. Like, and that's, I'm a genuinely curious person. Like, I want to know how things work. I want to know why you think the way you do, why you do the things you do. And I'm genuinely curious about it. And as someone who's empathetic, I can put myself into your shoes and really try to understand those emotions. It's not like a lot of people think empathy is like, well, that's just feeling sorry for someone. If I'm empathetic, I just feel for them. No, empathy is like truly understanding how someone feels. And you've got to do that. Like, you've got to experience it. You've got to talk to them. You've got to see those emotions. You've got to feel those emotions. And you've got to carry that on. Those two things, for me, are more powerful than any industry experience. I think that's one of my frustrations with the industry now, is we're getting very specific with experience. We have like, oh, well, you've never worked in fintech, so you can't take any job in fintech. Oh, you've never worked e-com, you can't ever work e-com. Oh, you've never worked hardware, you've never designed special fridges that require blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Like, if I'm a curious empath, you can throw me in any industry and I will figure it out. Like, I promise you, I will figure it out. I never wanted to ever be a cop. I designed systems for cops that they loved. I've never wanted to be someone who buys high-end furniture online. Well, I designed the homepage of Overstock to appeal to those people that buy high-end furniture online. Like, it doesn't matter what I'm designing. If I can put myself in those shoes and I'm genuinely curious about how they think, feel, do, and say, it doesn't matter what industry I'm in. And so those are the things that I would say, like, as a product manager, if you can hone those two skills, and unfortunately they're sometimes harder to teach than other things. But if you can hone them, like, you can be a great product manager because you're versatile. You can design systems and build products for anyone. Because if you're willing to talk to them and you're willing to listen to those users and you're willing to hear their feedback and hear their emotions and listen to their frustrations and try to solve those frustrations, you can build a great product. That's how great products are built, is by listening to users. They're not built by the coolest person in the room that can go and collect VC money the best. They're built by people who have a genuine concern and care for solving the problems of the users. Like, that's how we make incredible products.
Yeah, I actually share your concern because over the last period, right, I've seen different product managers trying to cross industries, and just because they didn't have that kind of background, the feedback is no. And
Yeah.
this is actually, I would say this is really frustrating because, again, it's not rocket science. And even if you require specific knowledge in that industry, that's attainable. But
Yeah.
I think that companies are a bit trying to have some sort of a plug and play solution, which I can tell you for sure is that if you don't look at the character, if you don't look at how the person is looking at the problem, perceiving them, and trying to work their way around it as a product manager, then you're not actually, you don't want a product manager. You just want a project manager or someone who just has a background in the industry. And this is actually the second point, right? It has been quite drastic, specifically in the software. Everyone is talking about feature factory, backlog administrator, product owners who actually don't do anything regarding the product. And now with AI coming up, things are getting much more automated. So I understand that, at least from my side, what I keep seeing is that at this point of time, even things like benchmarking, price positioning, even developing a simple strategy, these things can actually get automated. I did several test trials with few things and it actually works.
Yeah.
The point is, if you're not talking to your customers, if you're not looking at the human side of things, because even today, you look at different products, everything's getting almost automated. Even, and this is actually absurd, I'm starting to see that commenting on LinkedIn is getting AI automated. So you're getting the human experience completely out. And if you're looking at products, we actually we want to see more human experience, things getting personalized more, emotionally more. So I think this is one of the things that is very easy to see now with all this AI coming through, and you don't find really product managers who actually are real product managers that much as before. Things are becoming more program managers, project managers.
Yeah, it's scary. Like, that's, like I said, that's not my strong suit. Like, and I've been, so like I'm looking for my next full-time role. Like since that my startup went under, I've just been teaching. I obviously wrote the book and did that, but I'm looking for a full-time role. And it's been like alarming how often I've heard that, where they're like, oh, we really like your skills, we like your mentality, but you don't have experience in fintech. It's like, oh, okay, but like I literally can learn fintech in a month. Like put me in front of customers, let me talk to them, and I can gain that knowledge in a month. Like I'm an incredibly fast learner, I promise you. But they're just not willing to do the chance. They're looking for, just like you said, they're looking for someone who comes in as an SME, as a subject matter expert. But anyone can learn to be an SME. Like anyone can gain that knowledge. That knowledge isn't hard to gain. The best hires I've made have been the ones that are completely industry agnostic. Like I brought in like at Spillman, like making software for police, I brought in an ex-game designer that I had worked with and said, hey, I know you can do this because I know as a game designer, you're empathetic and you're curious. So you'll pick this up. At IDENT for the security software, for this screening software, I brought in someone who has a Master of Fine Arts degree. And I did that simply because like I needed someone who understood aesthetics and was genuinely curious about people. And as I talked to him, like it became clear that like, hey, this person can do the job. They may not understand the industry, but I don't care because they understand people. And people is what I'm trying to understand. Like we're trying to understand human behavior. And if the person can come in and do that, everything else is teachable. There's no reason I would need to worry about the other side of it. And you're absolutely right. Like those automated tasks, their AI is snatching those up. Like I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 or so years, the title of Scrum Master is gone.
Cease to exist. Yeah.
AI is handling all of the Scrum ceremonies.
Yeah, and I fully agree with you on this one.
Which I'm all for because I hate doing that.
So I think coming to the last part of the motivation aspect and the personal interest. So I think, as you mentioned, right, people are the most important part, and you have to design the products around the people, and you have to become more people person if you want to really become a product manager. So when you start looking at one of the acronyms that you mentioned, learning from pragmatic marketing part is nothing important ever happens in the office. And I am really inspired by this because personally, I have seen that just with a few customer visits. So when I was starting in product management back in 2018, right? I wanted to know more about the product and I wanted to know more about the customers. So I went out with the customer service team, right? I went into almost 15 to 20 homes and I watched people actually doing the laundry. At that time, I was part of the laundry team. And I started asking questions and the kind of insights you get, the understanding part, and how does that actually build and shift your mindset. So one of the things we discovered is that you have all these companies building these massive innovations and all these technologies, but looking at customers not just in one segment, across segments from the very entry level to the super luxurious one, all of them had one simple request: perfect cleaning. That's it.
Yeah.
They don't care about technology. They don't care about anything else. Just clean the clothes and keep the clothes intact, no damage.
Yeah.
That's literally it. And
Yeah.
I remember when discussing with everyone around the table about this is actually the insight. So how can you take this and develop a product that just delivers? This is the job to be done. This is the thing that the job to be done is going to deliver. How can you take this and convert that into an actual product without all the fuss around it?
Yeah. And there's a talent to that. Like there's a talent to saying like, hey, this, just like you said, like what's the job to be done? Like that job to be done is crucial because a lot of times in product and especially in technology, like there's this sense of like, well, if we can, we should. And that's not true. Like I don't think that that's true. Like if we can, we shouldn't. Like if the customer asks for it, we should. And that's like, I think you get, and you're starting to see this more, like as things tend more to like startups, you're starting to see more of this lean mentality where it's like, hey, let's get MVP and build from there. And that's kind of the way to do it, really, is like, what is the job to be done? And then let's add to it. Like, let's layer on features. I mean, going back to the layering, like we can layer more on, but like, what is the goal to be accomplished? We can add bells and whistles, like that. We have an engineering team that can do that, but why would we? Like, why should we? Like, if the customer doesn't need it, don't start with it. Like, don't come out the gate with it. And um, truly understand, like, can you solve their problem? And if you can solve their problem, I mean, it's kind of like this factor thing. Like, these are the two things that I take away from pragmatic that I love is the nihito, the nothing important ever happens in the office, which I love. Like, that's like become one of my other mottos is, get out and talk to customers. The other thing they talk about, and I can't remember exactly how they word it, but it's basically like, is there a problem? And is it pervasive? And are people willing to pay to solve it? Like, it's the 3 Ps. Like, if you can find a problem that is pervasive enough for people to pay to solve it, you've got a product. Like, that can make you money. And
Yes.
then you've just got to go out and solve, like, okay, well, let's build it. Let's build the solution and monetize it. And if you can do that, you can have a successful product. I mean, obviously, like, to what scale and what revenue, like those are all variables that you've got to figure out. But if there's a problem that people are willing to pay to solve, you have a product. That's step one. Like that is the gatekeep number one for any product. And that's kind of what I preach in my teaching is like, if you can't say yes to the 3 Ps, you don't really have a product. You might have something that's fun and interesting, and those are great too. Like I don't hate on things that don't make money, but like if you want to start a company and you want to run a legitimate company, you need those 3 Ps. And if you do, then you've crossed gate number 1. And then it's just calculating ROI from there. Once you understand like, okay, there is a return on investment. Now we just have to go and understand that return on investment. And is it worth the investment?
Yeah. So if we're trying to end now more with the inspiration quote, right? And I just want you to, so you mentioned that, right? Numbers don't say things, humans say things. And I think actually it builds up after all this discussion that it's up to the people.
Yeah. That's one of my favorites. I have a few obviously, but I always lean towards qualitative research over quantitative research. Like numbers are great, and numbers are fantastic for validating things. Like I love quantitative research to validate assumptions, right? But qualitative research, like from the user's mouth, is more valuable to me. I can do more with that than a spreadsheet of numbers. Like those numbers don't tell me a story. A human will tell me a story. Like I can sit down and do an empathy map with a user and look at the things they do, think, feel, and say. And that is way more valuable to me as a product manager than data collected over a week that tries to paint a picture of usage. And so I really do lead on that, like that qualitative research. And you even mentioned it earlier, like even just, I don't know the numbers, so I'm going to make them up, but talking to even one user will get you like 75% of the feedback you need. Talking to 2 users gets you to like 85, 90. Talking to 3 users gets you to like 95. So even if you just bounce ideas off of 3 people, you're going to get 95% of your feedback. So some people think like, oh, well, qualitative research is you've got to talk to 100 people. And no, talk to 3 people, 3 to 5 people, and you will get the majority of your feedback. You could go talk to another 100 people. You're not going to get much more than you got from those first 3 to 5 people. And so take the time to do that. Take the time to talk and have a conversation with 3 to 5 people. And those people will tell you way more than the numbers behind a survey or something else will.
Yeah. So, Bret, thanks a lot. I think this has been very inspiring, and I'm really happy with the conversation. So, if people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best place to find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Find me there. My website has like my talks and that kind of stuff. It's just www.bretwardle.com. Those are probably the 2 best places. But LinkedIn is where I'm most active. And if you want to reach out to me and have a discussion, just send me a message or follow me or whatever on there. I'm pretty active. I'm not one of those like sit back and not do anything. Like I love active conversations. I love creating a community that can have these discussions.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that actually. So in less than 2 hours, I get a response. So thanks a lot, Bret, and thanks a lot everyone for listening to the second episode of the PM Saga, and see you in the next episode. So